Hey everyone, welcome to our second online data meetup. My name's Carly Stack and I'm joined with my co-host Stephen Hancock. Today we are so
Hey everyone.
excited to interview Max
Hey
Schmeiser,
everyone,
who
welcome
is
to our
currently the
second
head of
online
data
data
science
meetup.
at Twitter.
My name's Carly Stack.
Max has experience building and leading large data science, machine learning, and economics teams, and he actually started his journey right here in Saskatchewan at the U of R. So, all of you live listeners, if you have any questions, just like last time, throw them in the chat. We'll get to them at the end of the session and answer them if we have time. So, Max, welcome. Why don't you start us off and tell us a bit more about your career journey so far?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's really great to be speaking to people back in Saskatchewan and data scientists in Saskatchewan. I was very excited to get connected to this group and just the broader data science community and the startups in Saskatchewan. And so thanks for having me. Yeah, in terms of my career progression, so as you mentioned, I started off at the University of Regina. So I grew up in Saskatchewan, grew up in Regina for the most part, spent a couple of years in Saskatoon when my dad was getting his graduate degree at the U of S. Moved back to Regina and stayed there all the way through undergrad. Got my degree in economics at the University of Regina. And from there, went on to McMaster University, got a master's degree in economics, and then down to Cornell in the US for a PhD in technically it was policy analysis management, but it was health economics. That was the department in which health economics was located. That's sort of my academic studies. I'd always gone through planning to be a professor of economics. That was my, sort of goal going into undergrad. And so I ended up getting a teaching position at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2008. It was extremely fortunate. I got the job just before the financial crisis really took hold in the U.S. And so it was nice to have a nice secure academic position, tenure track position through the financial crisis. Certainly made for interesting teaching the first few semesters, as it was highly salient for the students who were about to graduate and trying to get jobs. Yeah, so it was a professor for a couple of years. And from there, I actually moved on to the Federal Reserve Board after a few years of teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Just a great opportunity came up at the Federal Reserve Board to basically implement in practice the things I've been doing in terms of research. So work on financial literacy, on mortgage finance, foreclosure counseling, mortgage defaults. And so the Fed was obviously very interested in that, given that they had a consumer regulatory mandate. So I moved over there to work on that from more of a regulatory standpoint, as well as continue my academic research. Spent 5 years there doing a variety of things, regulatory as well as research, and working on a number of household finance surveys. Just to, the Fed was very interested in understanding the financial well-being of households. And so I launched a couple of surveys related to that. And then from there, after 5 years there, Amazon reached out and ended up interviewing there and getting a job out at Amazon in Seattle. They were looking to grow their economics team. It was about 20 or so people when I interviewed there. They had hired a chief economist, Pat Ari, from the University of Minnesota a few years back, and he was looking to substantially expand the team. So I went over there, started off actually as an IC, working on risk management in the science unit of what was Amazon Lending at the time. Quickly moved into more of a management role there. Ended up acquiring a bunch of teams as just opportunities came up across the Amazon Marketplace organization. Eventually, I moved from lending into Connections, which is a daily employee pulse survey product at Amazon. And then realizing that this is a very long career trajectory. I guess I have been working for 12 years post PhD, so it's
You've
starting
done it all.
Yeah, so from Amazon went on to Convoy, which is a tech startup in Seattle. Although it had $1 billion valuation when I joined, just raised 200 million from Google and T. Rowe Price and a few other places. Had 200 and some people when I joined. Saw it through growth to over 1,200 people, including growth of the data science team from 8 to 80 some people. Extreme hyper growth of the company, both in terms of revenue and also in terms of headcount, and the data science org in particular, literally an order of magnitude. And then, I guess earlier this year, Twitter reached out about this opportunity, seemed way too good to pass up. So, I decided that this was probably the most impactful place I could be in the coming year, certainly, and beyond. And so I ended up moving over here to Twitter, and here I am.
Wow, that's awesome. Quite a
Max,
journey.
Max, when did you move over? Was it pre-COVID?
So it was funny. I was literally about to interview like right before the COVID lockdowns happened. And I was like set to fly out and they canceled my flyout, sent everyone at Twitter home. And I've never met a single person that currently works at Twitter in person. Although now that I've actually hired people I used to work with to work for me again, now I know some people, but it's only because I've hired people I used to work with. Otherwise, I've like literally only met them on my computer screen. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, and changing jobs during COVID is the weirdest thing. You literally just swap out your laptop, and your laptop just shows up in the mail. You just like mail back your old laptop, take your new laptop, set it up, and then like boom, new faces pop up on your screen. Like that is literally changing jobs in COVID. So at least it is here in Seattle. Yeah, took me a while to adjust. I tried to use all the cues I could to like, okay, I'm at Twitter now. I had a Twitter coffee mug or Twitter shirts, like, just to try and remind myself where I work. Yeah, it's been fun.
Crazy times. So you've kind of given us your credentials as to why why you should be talking about the topic that we want to talk to you about building data science teams, right? So I guess just at the very beginning of building a data science team, what do you look for when you are hiring? Can you dig into that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually put a blog post up about this when I was at Convoy as I was initially growing the team. Obviously I take a look at the landscape in terms of what the company needs or what the team, the organization I'm working in needs, and make sure that I'm hiring the right skills and we have the right balance of skills. So that's first and foremost, just making sure you have the right mix of skills. All too often, at least, in the places I've been, people have rushed to hire like PhDs in machine learning when they don't even have basic data and analytics down. And so I've always, frankly, my first hires tend to be business analysts or data analyst type people, as well as data engineers, because it's hard to do the more advanced stuff if you don't have high quality data that's easy to use. The last thing you want to do is hire a bunch of PhDs and have them like spending their entire time writing SQL trying to extract data or doing ETL or whatever. So it's definitely making sure we have the right mix of skills on the team. We have the right foundations to do subsequent things, but obviously, of course, matching it to business needs. Like, what are the business needs right now? What are the skills we need to serve those needs? So in terms of what I look for in hiring, for every role, we design different interviews, questions. I'm sure you guys are familiar with like the questions that tend to get asked at tech companies for the various different roles. We're no different. All the roles I've been in are no different. Coding questions, problem-solving questions, quantitative, statistical questions, machine learning questions, depending on the roles. Experimentation, obviously, a big thing in most roles. Just questions that really dive into their ability to apply statistics and their coding skills and analytic skills to solving business problems and providing business insights.
Cool. So then, how do you weigh like the difference between somebody with experience versus somebody without experience? Are you looking for dramatically different skill set, or is the skill set basically the same? It's just one happens to have more experience in it.
Yeah, as people get more senior, they tend to, let's say, spike in different places. So, especially as you get to much more senior people, like you can have some ICs who are just extremely strong technically, like they're exceptionally brilliant statisticians or machine learning engineers or, machine learning scientists or, people with knowledge of causal inference or whatever. And so that's their strength. Others are just rarely do coding skills progress all that much. Frankly, there seems to be like sort of there's generally a sort of like a plateau in terms of like the quality of coding you need to be a data scientist. And that tends to plateau around like senior data scientist or staff data scientist. Frankly, it might even go downhill depending on the person. Beyond that, obviously there's like the main things you look for in terms of progression across the levels is ability to deal with business problem ambiguity, ability to deal with technical ambiguity in the problem. So basically, like you start off, okay, I can give you a clearly defined business problem, and you can come up with a technical solution to that without any assistance or much assistance from your manager or tech lead. Next is like you can be given a generic business problem by a PM, and you can solve both the, identify both the business problem and the technical solution to it. Next, of course, it's like you are identifying the business problems, you are coming up with the solutions, you are getting people to buy into that as something that needs to be done, and then executing on it, bringing people together to execute on it across, more and more scope. Obviously, just the impact you have increases with each level. You move company metrics by an increasing magnitude. You align across a broader set of people, a broader set of organizations within the company or teams within the company. You're speaking for executives more often, or you're actually influencing executive decision making, company strategy. That's sort of the progression I would typically expect.
When you mentioned there that some senior people end up decreasing their coding skills, was that some self-reflection or?
Oh, I haven't written any meaningful lines of code in like 3+ years. Even writing SQL at this point is starting to get like pretty bad. I just never do it. No, I was thinking even for ICs, like some of them are really on the proper documentation of their coding, very concise coding, like all of that, versus some who are just like, that's not their primary focus. Like it just depends on the person, obviously, what they tend to highly index on. Management's a whole separate track in terms of like what you're expected to do, and I could certainly go into that. But yeah, the coding is not one of the things I'm expected to do.
So you kind of talked kind of about the hard skills and whatnot. Can you go more into like the soft skills that you'd be looking for? Kind of like, that interaction of being able to pull out the business problem and stuff like that, I'm sure is included in that. But can you go into those soft skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of soft skills, like obviously communicating to non-technical or different type of technical audiences is really important. Just being able to work constructively with a diverse set of team members. Usually, especially in bigger tech companies, like nothing gets done unless it's done by a team in most cases. And so if you can't work constructively together, if you can't solve problems jointly, if you can't understand other people's perspectives, their priorities, that kind of stuff, and be sympathetic to that, you're not going to get too far. Those are certainly very important ones. Certainly, management, again, just being empathetic with your team members, understanding their perspective, understanding your partner's perspectives, I guess, which is not far off from an IC. That said, again, when we're talking about IC scientists, you can have a broad range of people. Like I have people who are extremely introverted and their preference is to sit at their computer and, code and do analysis. And they are really, really good at that. And so I'm happy to let them do that. And I'm happy to let other people who are, maybe less technical, but stronger on the softer skills, lead some of these sort of, cross-functional initiatives and communications and all that.
How do you pick out those type of things during an interview?
It is tough. Usually you can get some sense for where people spike. You can usually tell pretty quickly over the course of the interview whether communication is an issue for them or whether they're very clear, succinct communicators, whether they can speak to, non-technical audiences. Usually you do that by having, non-technical stakeholders on the panel and asking about their, times they've collaborated with cross-functional partners, how they've overcome, challenges with communication or got their buy-in for various things. Obviously, the technical skills, you just have them go deep on technical problems and with a range of different people across different areas. And I usually say, especially for the most senior people, if you don't come out of that interview having learned something from them, as in they taught you something in the interview session, they're probably not, principal level scientists, they should be teaching you something because they should be world experts on something. And so that I've definitely seen that with interviews we've had with some of the people I have on my team in terms of principal scientists. They will teach people forecasting in the interview, and so they're just very, very strong technically.
You kind of alluded to this earlier when you were talking about hiring those business analysts, data engineers first, but what kind of roles and positions do you think are fundamental to getting that well-rounded data science team that's effective?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think data engineers are critical. I've always built data engineering teams in every organization I've operated. Um, I really appreciate that sort of bridge role between the production engineers who are maybe outputting the raw data into the data warehouse, and then like the scientists, and they don't always communicate effectively to each other. The production engineers don't necessarily understand like what the end user of the data is going to do with it, what they need, why some of the data issues they might not think much out of are actually huge downstream issues. And so it's good to have that translation layer of people who are strong engineers and can advise them on architecture, data architecture, and best practices and all that, and efficiency. But also take like know the end customers and understand the analytic uses of those data, or the end business uses of those data. So those are critical. Obviously, you always, like every company needs reporting, self-serve tools of some kind, dashboards. And so certainly making sure you have that. Yeah, but then it just becomes, what are the business problems your team is charged with solving? Most often people want to know, like, what's the effect of, I launch a new feature, I add a new product, we launch some program, we change a policy, like what's the causal effect on some downstream outcome. So usually you get into A/B testing or other causal inference approaches. And then, yeah, certainly there are lots of machine learning optimization, other things you can do as the company becomes more sophisticated.
Do you find that the data engineers, they're also helping like get the data that the data scientists need in terms of like transformations or SQL or anything like that?
Yeah, and again, it's sort of like how you get a decision about how you want to structure your team, whether you want data scientists doing more of that, especially on the business logic side, or whether you want the data engineers to do that, whether you want them like maintaining some kind of core layer that's like the raw building blocks, and then like you have a BI layer maintained by your data scientists who really understand the business logic relevant to the product, or understand the business context. That's a choice in terms of how you want to staff it. It's honestly tough to find like data scientists who want to spend their entire time like doing ETL, so that can be a challenge, but they all obviously want to move on usually to the analytics and then machine learning, etc. But yeah, it sort of just depends on what's the right arrangement for your particular business and team.
So does that mean you gravitate towards, if it's hard to find data scientists to do the ETL, does that mean you gravitate towards finding the data scientists that don't and have the data engineers do the whole process? Or
yeah, basically. Or you hire a steady stream of junior data scientists where this is like what they do to like just get trained and get an understanding for the data and the systems, and then you keep graduating them and you keep backfilling them.
Actually, that kind of goes great into the next question of like this difference between like you alluded to this even before, where it's like the specialist versus the generalist in data science. What should a team be composed of? Should they be composed of more of the generalists, the specialists? Does it depend?
Definitely depends. I'd say usually early on you want generalists. Like you need people, especially when you're like the only data scientist or one of the first like 3 or 4 data scientists, you're generally going to need to be full stack, because you're just going to be asked to do a broad range of different things at different times. As the team grows, say past 10, 20 people, I strongly recommend specialization. Tends to be much more efficient. People tend to be much happier. It's also to be honest, it's hard to find really, really good full stack people. And so whereas you can find specialists in particular areas pretty easily, relatively easily. So I've definitely been strongly in favor of specialization across all of my teams. I think it's made them very efficient. I think it's generally led to better job satisfaction. And so I definitely recommend that once you have the scale necessary.
So does that mean that as you grow, you usually lose the generalists, or do you push them into a specialist role, or do you keep those generalists around because you still need some of those within the org?
Yeah, there it really depends on them and how they see professional development for themselves. Also, there are always opportunities for generalists and maybe you just move them around more often. That is, maybe they're on one type of project one quarter and another type of project another quarter. You can always find room for them if they're solid contributors. but there is, yeah, maybe, especially people who like say joined a startup and just like that scrappy do everything environment, like the company might grow beyond them. But that would be, again, their professional development decision and where they think they're most effective and where they get the most, professional satisfaction. Not because that you can't find work for them to do effectively.
So do you think that data practitioners should first focus on breadth and then depth, or is it okay to go right into depth and get that specialist kind of training?
I think it also depends on like what you are looking for in terms of your career. Like, where do you want to start out? Do you want to? Some people like to get that broad exposure initially, just so that they sort of know the lay of the land ahead of time. They can figure out where they want to specialize, where they think they'll be, they'll enjoy specializing the most. Others, again, if you just have a real passion for a particular area, yeah, go get a PhD in operations research or economics or applied math or whatever, and then then look for roles that'll really let you use those skills.
So kind of going past the like hiring somebody, after the hire, what kind of onboarding process do you recommend? How do you like evaluate those first few months that a data scientist after they've joined the organization?
Sure. In terms of onboarding process, I've run pretty much the same onboarding process through all my teams, which is a pretty robust onboarding document that outlines some of their initial projects and all the people they should talk to, and like all the resources available to them. We usually have a wiki. Almost always we have a wiki in terms of like, here's how you set up your account. Here's all the things you need to know. Here's how here's the version of Python we use and all that. And just helps them like step by step get set up, know what data to use, know what tools we use, and frankly, like just since it's a wiki, we expect every new person who comes in to like either update it, add to it as they find things that like, oh, I wish I'd known this as a new hire, or I'm a new hire, I had to spend like a couple of hours digging up this piece of information here. I'm just going to put it here for like every subsequent new hire. And when you have that like common resource that's constantly updated by every new hire, it tends to be pretty robust. I've seen these on my past teams like get huge, and they're just incredibly valuable resources. And it's all because like every single person just contributed a little bit to it. Also, it's great for like the existing team members to go back to as a reference when they haven't done something in a while, or they haven't worked in an area and now there's all these changes. So that's definitely been a big part of it. Onboarding buddies, really important. Certainly like a data science team member if you have them. And if not, or if you have an embedded model where you have like data scientists matrixed in with engineers and product managers and designers, what I tend to do is find them both a data science partner that's maybe in a somewhat related team or can actually help them answer data science questions. And then I find them a buddy within their like pod or team, local team. Maybe it's an engineer, that's usually the best bet, that can help them with like data specific to their team or system specific to their team or business context specific to their team. And then that's generally how I run the onboarding process for my new team members. We draft a 30, 60, 90-day plan, but usually it starts with like the first couple of projects we expect them to do. We give them like a pretty easy project that's well-defined, self-contained, shouldn't take more than 3 weeks to get them started. And then we have like broader scope projects after that. And again, it depends on their seniority and all that, what those projects look like. And then we just do regular check-ins, the one-on-ones with their manager, maybe skip one-on-ones, and then 30, 60, 90-day check-ins and sort of usually drafting a 30, 60, 90-day doc and seeing how they're progressing against that.
So after 90 days, is that kind of generally when you feel like they should be fully onboarded, or does it take even longer in general for data scientists?
I would certainly hope that after 90 days, actually, I would hope much before that they've already made contributions to the team. They've delivered, to my point about like, give them a 3-week project or something. My goal is usually like within the first month, the team members made some kind of contribution. And so one for their own, like, it makes them feel good that like, yeah, I'm here, I'm productive, and it's only been a month. It's also a good sort of test of how how efficient your onboarding process is. If you can have team members like committing code or pushing things to production, or again, depends on your context, or like setting up experiments and running experiments within a month, kind of suggests that you've got your systems, your training, all of that down pretty well. And so certainly for those first things, unless you've made a horrible hire, I usually think it's more on the team and the company than the team member if they can't ship things quickly. And so I usually think like if hopefully you're shipping something useful within the first month.
Cool.
So how do you integrate new hires like into the team? You kind of mentioned that buddy system. Is there anything else to set them up so they're successful?
Yeah, buddy system, a lot of local team support. We tend to have a lot of local team resources. Mentors are also something we tend to get people relatively quickly. And that might be distinct from the buddy approach. And it might also be like a non-data science mentor, it might be a product mentor, it might be an engineering mentor, depending on which areas they feel they need to grow in. And we think they need to grow in. Beyond that, I mean, we tend to have a lot of team meetings. So for example, like we have, team all hands monthly or bi-monthly. We have broader like data science organization all hands. We have local team meetings, team lunches. We also have brown bag sessions where we have like, say, if you focus on experimentation, we have experimentation brown bags where you can come and present your work or get feedback on ideas from people who work in experimentation, but not necessarily in your same product area. Forecasting, machine learning, whatever, reading groups, brown bag groups, just other ways you can connect with people who share similar interests, work on similar things across the company.
So those local team meetups or whatever, are those actual like local as in who's in your city? Or is that like...
Okay. No, I meant in terms of your local, like the people you work with day in, day out. So say you're on like the home timeline team. You regularly connect with the other scientists on home timeline, or the health data science team regularly connecting with the other health data scientists.
So then how does this process, I guess, change because of COVID, or does it change? It's just you do it over video now instead of...
Yeah. I mean, for a large part, we are just moved everything to virtual. I will say like more team events, like social events, obviously that's been a challenge and we cut those for an extended period. We're now trying some virtual events like virtual escape rooms and things like that to, for the team building. I think we have one scheduled, one of my teams has one scheduled for Friday, so I'll find out how good those are. Yeah, so we definitely try like the social team building activities, as well as the sort of more work related team building activities. And yeah, with your local, like the people you work with day in, day out.
Okay, so you kind of started talking about like, they're having to accomplish something meaningful in the first like 30 days or something like that. But kind of going even further into the future, how do you start evaluating the individual's performance and then maybe also like the team's performance of for data scientists?
Yeah, depending on the nature of the team, it's either like their team, like product engineering, design, data science, will take goals or use OKRs, and it'll be measured by like to what extent are the data scientists contributing to achieving those OKRs. They might have KRs the data science is responsible for directly, and so it'll be a matter of like, are they hitting their KRs or not? For more central teams, like say you have a foundational tooling team, or you have a data engineering team. Again, I tend to use OKRs there, just setting some objective around like, especially when they're internally facing teams, like user usage or satisfaction or something like that. And then usually your KRs are a lot of things you ship. But can be like metrics around latency or uptime or number of users or whatever. Just depends on the nature of the team, but yeah.
So if they're in that more like embedded state type of thing where they're like part of a product team or something like that, and you're trying to suss out like, hey, how much of this did the data scientists contribute to that? How do you go about that? Is that like the manager of that data scientist making like an educated guess? Is that like, discussion with a larger product team, or how does that go?
Yeah. So I do try to have local managers, like basically managers for every area aligned with like the product and engineering manager. And so they usually have a good sense for like what their team contributed and individual team members contributed within that space. And also hopefully there's pretty clear, like, if it's shipping a machine learning model and hitting a certain level of accuracy on the machine learning model, I'm guessing that was done by the data science team and not the product team. But so that's when it's pretty, clear cut. More broadly, yeah, it's a lot of partner feedback. It's asking the product managers when we collect feedback. It's asking the engineering managers, the engineers, the IC engineers, like, what did this person contribute? And usually people are pretty transparent about like, this person did a great job, they did this, and it helped a lot. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of feedback, peer feedback, partner feedback that you collect.
Kind of going off script here. You kind of talk about the developers not maybe or the engineers not maybe contributing too much to a ML or machine learning algorithm or something like that. But as it's becoming more democratized, do you see that line being blurred more and engineers stepping more into that realm and doing things in that realm?
Yeah, so I said product managers who are usually less likely to ship machine learning models. On the engineering side, yeah, I mean, obviously, more and more you have tooling available through AWS or Google Cloud or other places that lets you build and deploy and train, tune models with like if you're a solid engineer, a lot of this tooling is available for you. So certainly, yeah, it is becoming easier. That said, I think like a lot of the times the difference between the engineers and the data scientists is like the level of statistical training and causal reasoning in some cases. And so obviously this is like a generalization. It's not necessarily true of everyone, but so I tend to think of the data scientists as bringing a lot of that analytic, statistical, causal reasoning to, say, model building. Again, like you still need to think thoughtfully about the features you build, or in some cases like the experimental design, because there's potential bias, other things like that, where it's like having that strong statistical foundation, knowledge of experimentation, statistics of experimentation, causal inference, or machine learning, or just that really helps you build better quality models. That said, yeah, of course, many engineers can and do have those skills. And they can build, exceptional machine learning models, or run experiments, or do optimization. Yeah.
How does that work in like an organization like Twitter, where it's like how does it matter if the roles and responsibilities cross over, or is there like friction there, or how does that go usually?
No, I mean, I think people tend to, it's like Twitter, of course, is a place where you need a team to do anything. And so I think people generally focus on the areas they can best contribute, and that'll differ from team member to team member and team to team. And yeah, they all contribute in their sort of best way towards, accomplishing whatever the objective for the team is.
So does that kind of speak to like it being useful to have that a team that's composed of those different components? If it's actual like affecting the product, you would have engineers and data scientists in the same team working together, and designers and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I certainly have found that sort of matrix model to be the most effective one, where you have people with different perspectives, backgrounds, skills, who are sitting together and focused on the same mission and achieving the same mission. I found it so much more productive when you have like you're trying to push a model to production. You're sitting next to the engineer that is productionizing the model, or is on call for that model, or whatever it might be. It's such a better arrangement, and you just get so much efficiency out of that. So I'm definitely in favor of that approach.
So now if we kind of switch gears and talk about like the management leadership track. So after you build this initial team, what is required to kind of scale the organization to start building more and more teams?
Multiple teams. So, I mean, other good managers, I guess, is a good start. Usually, especially as you become more and more senior, your effectiveness is largely determined by the quality of the people who report to you, and frankly, then the people who report to them. So having good managers, good leaders you can trust, that's certainly critical to scaling. If you have bad managers on other teams, you're not going to scale very effectively. You're going to have to deal with a lot of issues. Process is the other thing. Like, just have clear, consistent processes across your organization for how you guys do project intake, planning, prioritization, project reviews, scoping. It's just having consistency across teams and having clear processes, clearly defined processes. Those become increasingly useful as you scale. So for example, like, it's always wonderful for me as like a senior leader if I can go in Jira and just see like what every person on my team is currently working on, like what projects, for the most part, like what projects are they working on, what state are those projects in. It certainly makes it easy for me as a leader when I'm talking to other leaders about like, hey, what's the status of this project? If I can just quickly pull it up and say like, here's the latest on that project, here's the ETA, here's the person working on it. So I find that extremely valuable as a leader. Beyond that, process communication, developing communication mechanisms across the team, information sharing. You always worry about, as the team gets bigger, people duplicating effort, or frankly, even working at cross purposes potentially. So mechanisms for sharing out projects that people are working on. To my point, like, that's why I have those groups of people around the same skill set, like who are doing experimentation or causal inference or forecasting or machine learning across the team, where they have reading groups and they can share work with each other, so people can identify like, well, I'm working on that too, or I'm working on something different that might conflict with that. And or, hey, I know we're going to do this thing on the engineering side and change data, and that'll affect the model that you're building. It's those types of mechanisms that are really important. And then also just the general like team building and all hands, things like that for broader team culture and all that.
Kind of a tangent, but you mentioned using Jira and looking at what projects are currently being worked on. Does your team generally work in sprints, or is it more project to project?
No, we tend to do sprints, and of course, like, sprints for data scientists are different, usually different than engineering sprints. Certainly the level of abstraction you need to do is often quite different. And, for example, it can be as simple as like, for the next 2 weeks, I'm doing just open data exploration or feature exploration. And it's not like clearly well-defined what it is you'll deliver at the end of that time period, but it might be time boxed in the sense that you've got these 2 weeks for feature exploration, then you're done. I don't care if there's like, 20 other good ideas you have. We need to ship this in 6 weeks. And so, we need time box things. But I tend to always make sure my team members are planning, are time boxing things, are prioritizing and making sure that they know where all their other team members, what their other team members are working on, and who's doing what and when.
Kind of throwing back into like the hiring thing, but like, if you're hiring a manager, what are you looking for?
Varies somewhat from team to team, but usually like a baseline level of technical knowledge. We expect them to be able to do some coaching of their team members, technical review of their team members, especially at the front lines, sometimes jump in and get hands-on if needed. And then, just general empathy for people, ability to coach people, mentor people. Increasingly, you look to the managers to be the cross-functional communicators, the planners, the prioritizers. And so people who, again, index highly on those softer skills, if they're going to be working with a lot of stakeholders. Ideally, people who can come up with some kind of strategic vision. I really expect my leaders to, and frankly, my team members more broadly, to help set the product strategy and to inform the roadmap and to be identifying business opportunities. And so I look for people who are strategic, who can think about the business context, business opportunities, and how to apply data science to taking advantage of those or solving business problems. So certainly those things, and then knowledge of process, ability to implement process and use process effectively certainly becomes important as you become more senior.
So then you do kind of look for people who can actually, or not actually, who have done the job in the past or done parts of the job in the past?
Yeah, almost universally, we don't, certainly within data science, I don't think I've ever hired somebody who's like say an MBA to be a data science manager, and they have no like hands-on data science experience. I mean, we tend to hire people who were IC data scientists at some point in their career, and then have progressed often through like a tech lead role or a tech lead with reports, and then to a manager position, frontline manager position, and up. Also, you sometimes get people who are like in academia and then moved over to tech and then moved into management. That would, I guess, be myself. But rarely is it like just hiring professional managers to manage data scientists.
So then, if there's a IC that wants to kind of, does it actually get sunny in Seattle?
It apparently did today. It was super cloudy up until like 10 minutes ago, and then all of a sudden the sun's just like blasting me through my window. So that was unexpected. Yeah, I would have lowered the shades otherwise.
Sorry. For an IC that wants to start moving into like the managerial track or the executive track kind of thing, what kind of advice would you have for them?
I think building out the skills I highlighted in terms of the soft skills, working with partners, identifying strategic and business opportunities, and really knowing how to get people to align around those. Project management is increasingly important. Just so any opportunities you get to project manage, those are really helpful to the extent that you're planning out projects, creating the roadmap, creating the requirements, thinking about the, how to get this team to do that because you need that done, making sure they do it. All those things, those are pretty important skills. Learning the business context, all those things become increasingly important. And then also just like taking on mentorship opportunities, because that's a good indication of whether you can like coach and mentor, actual direct reports effectively. Taking on team building activities or other sort of service work for the team, because again, that's something you'll be expected to do more and more as managers, just more administrative or team related things. So those are all usually good ideas to help you prepare.
So do you see the managers doing the project management, or do you often have like separate project managers or product managers, I guess, depend on what you're doing, but like, do you have separate roles for those and then a manager on top of that, or how does that usually work?
So usually, yes, you do have a product manager, but they're usually focused specifically on the product and managing the roadmap at a higher level. And then just like you have an engineering manager who's managing the engineers and the allocation of projects, prioritization, making sure that they're translating the requirements from the product manager into a clear roadmap for their team and clear, individual items for their team to execute on. Same for the data science manager. They're translating the business problems and they're with their business knowledge into clear data science problems. They're advising their team members on how to structure their work, how to time box their work. They're running the sprint processes, and planning processes. So I definitely expect them to do all of that.
What would you say is the most rewarding and challenging part of leading a data science group?
Rewarding part, I love just seeing people develop and succeed in their careers. I like seeing people, develop new skills, get promoted, move on to like bigger and better opportunities, increase their scope of work and scope of impact. Basically, hopefully, like every manager, just seeing your team members succeed is usually pretty rewarding. I find it quite rewarding and validating. Also, just like seeing the impact your team has when you can clearly identify that like the data science team has driven X, Y, and Z for the company, and we are much better for that. Without us, we wouldn't be making, we wouldn't have had X% more growth year on year or additional revenue or users or whatever. I think all of those are really good. I find those really validating. Challenging, certainly as a senior leader, just the bunch of administrative stuff you have to do. I think increasingly as you become more senior, as I've alluded to earlier, like you're rarely solving technical problems. Usually you're just sort of like getting some overview of a technical problem or maybe being consulted at some point. But rarely are you diving into the details. Certainly you're not coding, or rarely are you coding unless you structure your job in a particular way. Often it's a lot of administrative stuff, whether it's HR stuff or hiring. Hiring becomes a huge part of your job as you become more senior. Like I probably spend half my time hiring people, and you know, a lot of that's just building relationships, having coffee with people over and over, and just maintaining relationships over time, especially for senior people, or for specialized people. So not that I don't enjoy that part, but it's just like, you know, the sheer volume of administrative stuff you do can be a little overwhelming sometimes. Planning at the executive level. Yeah.
Do you miss it? Like, do you keep like little side projects on the go just so that you kind of like, you know, get into it and tinker? Or
No, I long since gave up on that just because, well, one, I could never do anything that like anyone actually needed because I had no idea when it would actually get done. And two, it just becomes harder and harder to actually like stay connected to the data, frankly, even just be a competent coder. And so, you know, it's far, no, sadly, no. I have not done much hands-on work in like 3 years. So it's been a while. Yeah, I definitely do miss, like, you know, obviously I was in academia, or effectively in academia, for 8 years, and writing papers, academic papers, and doing research, and, you know, doing my own data analysis. And yeah, do I miss those times when I was like spending 8 hours straight, like just analyzing the data and working on the data and doing analysis and trying to understand things better, and you know, reading through the literature to figure out how I can approach a problem? Like, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, but that, yeah, unfortunately, long since gone.
okay, we're gonna kind of, I guess, go on a completely different topic. There's this movie called Percy coming out sometime soon. Can you tell us about your personal connection to that?
Sure. So yeah, I actually, as far as I understand, it's actually coming out in theaters like in the next week or something. I don't quite know how that's happening because I'm pretty sure every theater in Seattle's closed. Not that they were necessarily going to play it here. But yeah, I know it was at the Calgary International Film Festival. Yeah, so that's my grandfather who's portrayed there. Obviously, it's a dramatization, you know, it's a Hollywood movie. So, you know, I haven't seen it myself yet. I'm certainly curious to see how closely the facts line up with reality. Yeah, that took a huge chunk of my childhood. You know, that was going on, that legal fight with Monsanto. So yeah, it was. Yeah, it's interesting to see it made into a movie, especially at this point. It's been so long since that actually happened, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Are you somebody who's going to judge it harshly, or are you just like, it's Hollywood fluff, whatever they do, whatever they do?
Well, from everything I've heard, it portrays my grandfather quite well. So, I mean, again, I think it's got a whole bunch of you know, additional stuff that never really happened, but so I don't think I'm too worried about like the portrayal. I think it's more for like, you know, oh, that's neat that they took, you know, a real life story that I had a connection to, and turned it into a movie with, you know, Christopher Walken playing my grandfather. And like, I'm still curious. It seems like there's like I don't know about the grandchildren. There's like, I know in the trailer there's like a granddaughter who I assume is like meant to be my sister or some amalgam of grandchildren, and so I'm curious to see who plays her. But yeah, it doesn't sound like I made it into the movie, unfortunately.
I mean, so I grew up in Watson, Saskatchewan, it's like 45 minutes from Bruno. And just me growing up, I recall that being a pretty big topic of conversation, you know, in those farming communities. So I'll be interested to see how that shakes out. But yeah, interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, yeah. As far as I know, it's favorable portrayal. It was, yeah, it was a complicated topic, and so it was certainly controversial back then, as GMOs were relatively new back then, and you know, the idea of patented seeds that you had to pay for every year, and you know, that could potentially, you know, contaminate other fields, and you were responsible for it, whether it, you know, you put it there or not. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, interesting issue. Seems like that's largely been resolved in favor of GMOs, but yeah.
All right, I think that's all the questions we had. I'm just looking. I don't have the chat open. Do you, Stephen?
I don't. It's actually on my other screen that I purposely turned off so I would stop looking at it. I don't think we have any questions on there right now, so we should be good.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much, Max, for meeting with us. It was a pleasure.
No problem. Seriously, no questions? Do we have any viewers?
Yeah, I don't know.
There's a handful of viewers. Most of them end up coming later, so we'll see where that comes in later. We might have to ping you afterwards once it gets posted.
Yeah, with all the questions.
All right.
Cheers.